Hello everybody, welcome to the Odin's Call YouTube channel where we talk about stuff. My name is Ragnar, I'm the host of this terribly terrible YouTube channel. But I'm really glad that you came to check out this video. If you like the video, I'd appreciate it if you'd indicate that by, well, liking the video. And if you like the video sufficiently, it'd be super cool if you subscribe to my channel because occasionally I have something interesting to talk about. Today, I want to talk about the fact that I've known 2 murderers in my lifetime. Not minor murderers, like for real insane murderers that did crazy insane things. That's what I'm going to talk about today. Let's get it. All right, so let me set the scene for you. I, in my middle school years, skipped school for a day precisely one time, where I went to spend the entire day in my friend's basement, well, a friend of a friend's basement, smoking cigarettes and generally being a little hooligan. And it was an interesting thing because the person whose house I was hanging out in, he was a junior in high school. I was in the 7th grade. And he was going to a night school for, well, problematic kids because he liked to get into fights. And I will tell you that the one time that I saw this kid get into a fight, it was one of the scariest things I'd ever seen in my entire life because he didn't want to go in for a fight. He wanted to go in to maim or kill another kid. And it was an interesting and difficult thing to watch. This particular kid, this junior in high school whose basement I was hanging out in, but not a particularly large person, but apparently just a rabid Wolverine. And there was another kid at my school, or not my school, but the high school right next to my school. His name was Ben. Ben was a rather big kid, 6'3", 6'4", easily, probably 300 pounds. And Jason, the kid that we're talking about today, was, I don't know, maybe 5'7", 5'8", 160, 170 pounds, and absolutely had zero fear whatsoever in engaging in a combative engagement with Ben, who was much bigger than he was by a long shot. And it had been scheduled all day that these 2 kids were going to meet in the parking lot of a movie theater where they were going to act out their aggressions on one another. And there were, I don't know, it had to have been 100 kids that showed up. And Ben and Jason squared off. We met up at the appointed time. They squared up and immediately started going at it. And I got to level with you. Jason was not faring well against this much bigger kid, but he just seemed impervious to whatever was being inflicted on him. I watched him get hit in the face I don't know how many times. And it had busted him up pretty good. I mean, days later, he had black eyes and swollen eyes, and he didn't care at all. But the interesting thing is what I observed is he would do anything to win that fight, anything. So much so that when Ben finally grabbed him and kind of dragged him down to the ground and was doing some damage, Jason got a hold of the nether regions, and one-handed proceeded to just squeeze. And well, suffice it to say, some legit damage was done, and it took several kids their better part of 30 seconds to just kind of peel him off of this kid, while he smiled the entire time, despite bleeding from the mouth, bleeding from the nose, bleeding from the ears. You know, the kid got the snot kicked out of him, but he didn't care. He won the fight and apparently did some lasting damage to his opponent. And I mention that because it was that sense of ruthlessness that really scared me as a kid. And in fact, I did everything after that. You know, I made every effort after that to not be around Jason anymore because he was scary. And I thought about the idea of ever doing anything that sent his ire my way, and I just kind of went, I don't want to mess with Jason. He's Man, I mean, I still cringe thinking about it today because I mean, it was absolutely brutal what he was willing to do in an effort to win that fight. And fast forward 10 years, I guess it was. I less than that, less than that, 7 or 8 years. I'd gotten back from Germany. I lived in Germany for 3 years. For those of you who don't know, stepdad was in the army. I'd come back and I was watching the news, the local town where I lived at the time, in St. Charles, Missouri, and I hear on the news, Jason Shipman was arraigned today on charges of first-degree murder, and I went, no way, can't be the same person, no way. And I looked at the TV, and sure enough, they were walking Jason, my former friend Jason, up the stairs of the courthouse with his hands handcuffed behind him, and a big sheet-eating grin on his face, because he had zero remorse for what he had just done. So the quick story is that he had lured a 13-year-old girl onto the Lindenwood College campus, which, by the way, was a really cool school that was always nice to drive past. It was a gorgeous campus, but he apparently lured this girl onto campus with, I'm a college boy and you're a 13-year-old girl, and it'd be fun for us to hang out. And the end result was he did a lot of things that a man shouldn't do to anybody, much less a 13-year-old girl. And at the end of the altercation, murdered and decapitated this girl. And it took them, I think they said that it was about a week where they had absolutely no clue, and finally some things started to roll in. And I could tell you, from having watched some of the footage from the trial and the interviews that have been done, he doesn't care at all. Absolutely ruthless. The kind of person that I wish just didn't exist on this planet at all, ever. Like the definition of evil. It was terrible. So that's the first person that I knew that was a ruthless, murderous piece of shit. And the one that I'm about to tell you is so much better. Well, the story's better. Not a better person by any stretch of the imagination. Holy shit. So my father lived in a really small rural county in Missouri, Pike County, Missouri, just north of St. Louis. And there was a family that lived nearby that really provided our family with milk and eggs and beef, and they were some of the sweetest people you would have ever met in your life. The Kreutzers, Dr. Kreutzer and his wife. I never really knew their first names because it was always Dr. Kreutzer and Mrs. Kreutzer, and they were just this sweet old timey kind of back hills country farm family, and they were wonderful people. I never knew either one of them to ever be in the slightest bit aggressive, unfriendly, or frankly anything short of just the nicest people I think I've ever met in my life. And the Kreutzers had adopted 3 kids, Missy, Pat, and Paul. Missy I think she was a little bit older than the boys by a year or two. And Pat and Paul were identical twins. I was really good friends with Pat. Every summer that I spent with my father, I'd spend a fair amount of my time with Pat. And for reference, Pat was a really sweet young man. One of the nicest people that I've ever met. Might have been a little on the slow side. He wasn't much of a book learner, but when it came down to getting things done around the farm, all his dad had to say was, "Hey, I need you to go do this thing." "All right, Dad, no problem." And he'd go take care of it, no matter what it was. I mean, to kind of give you an idea of his state of mind, I was 11, 12, 10, 11, 12 in that age range when we were friends, and the age difference didn't matter at all. In fact, I remember one day he marveled at the fact that I knew that a mile was 5,280 feet. He had made some comment about, well, I don't know how long a mile is, and I said it's 5,280 feet, and he's like, wow, his mind was blown that I knew that obscure fact about the distance of a mile. Sweetest person you ever want to meet, most loyal person you ever want to meet, and I've actually had no luck at tracking him down, probably because he's not the type of person that would really interact much with on social media. Pat would occasionally talk about his twin brother that was never around, ever. And that was a source of curiosity for me, but he would clam up as soon as you would start to ask any questions about where his brother Paul might be. And it turns out that brother Paul had some legitimate and significant issues as a young kid, sufficient that he was in juvenile detention for, well, apparently the entire time that I knew Pat. And it had been quite some time that I'd known the Kreutzer family, and had always known them to be the sweetest people in the world, and I still believe that, by the way. But Paul came home after having served, I guess, his juvenile sentence. And the kid that I knew in Pat, his identical brother was the polar opposite of Pat. It was almost as if Pat got 100% of the goodness and the forthrightness and he was great. And then Paul was the human manifestation of the worst evil you can imagine. Just being around the man felt like he was sucking all of the energy out of the room. He was terrifying. There was just something about this guy that just rubbed you the wrong way no matter what you did. And it was such a weird juxtaposition of how you felt in the room with Pat. Pat was just, hey guys, hey, how is everybody? It's good to see you. Oh man, I'm so glad that you're hanging out with us today. And Paul was just evil. So much so, I had this super intelligent, sweet, amazing farm dog. His name was Cub. Cub was the coolest dog in the world. He was rather big and super intelligent. I swear he spoke English half the time. You could say anything to him and he understood what you were saying. You know, let's go down to the lake, Cub. Okay, and he'd just take off towards the lake. He knew exactly what was going on. And Cub was this amazing. Like, he always seemed to know what you were thinking and what you were trying to do. And, you know, people would come up on the property and he would kind of hold them in the front of the house until he got verification from one of the humans that they were okay. And then he would just kind of casually come, okay, you said they're all right, so I guess they're all right now. And but Cub was also a killer. For reference, we bought a bag of dog food one year, and we filled up his dog bowl, and it ended up molding over. And we would, you know, empty the bowl and give him more dog food, and that would mold over because he was a farm dog. He would he'd go out and hunt gophers and snakes and, you know, whatever he could get his paws on, so to speak. So we just stopped feeding him. If he wanted something, he let us know, but he was hunting his own food, and that's how he liked it. So this was we lived up in the country with a variety of packs of coyotes and that sort of thing that would like to come down and try their hand at fighting our 140-pound dog and losing horribly because he was just a badass. So yeah, he was not a dog that you probably wanted to mess with a whole lot, but he was sweet-natured by nature. And one day, Paul decided to just walk onto our property. I don't know why he did this, but you know, it was quite a little journey from his house to our house, but he just decided to walk to our house. And what ended up happening was my dog, he didn't think that my dad was home, which tells me he was probably there for another purpose. So my dog stopped him in the front, and the dog would not let up. We said, it's okay, you know, it's okay, Cub, don't worry about it. And the dog just wasn't having it. Yeah. He was spooked, and that was weird for Cub because he wasn't spooked by anything. I've watched him surrounded by 12 coyotes, and he has zero reaction. But there was something about Paul that just made him go, oh, you know, you could tell he was really freaked out. We kind of invited him to leave because we don't need Paul around. He was scary. My dad, who was home, thankfully, at the time, because My father was a capable marksman, if you take my meaning. My dad said, I'll take you home. You're going to ride in the back of the truck. And when we got into my dad invited me to come. Guess Paul's excuse was, I just went for a walk, and then I realized you lived here, and I thought I'd come say hi. And my dad's like, yeah, that's not okay. When we got into the cab of the truck, my dad had reached under the seat and put a 9mm in my hands and said, just keep an eye out. Something's not right with this guy. And you just always knew something wasn't right with Paul, no matter what. And so it was many moons later, as a young adult, that I hear that Paul has done something horrible. He has apparently surveilled this woman's house, arrived at her house with all of the accoutrements of somebody who plans to do tremendous harm to another human being. He had waited for the husband to leave. Then he waited for the kids to leave. And once he knew that he was going to have free run of whatever he wanted to do for the next several hours after the kids and husband had left, he went into the house and proceeded to murder, amongst other things that I won't talk about on YouTube, this sweet lady with whom I was familiar. It was a small community, so everybody pretty much knew everybody. And then left her body there after what had to be an hours-long process of ending her life. Left her body there for her kids to find when they got home. The fact that I've known two people in my lifetime that are capable of that level of atrocity, and I'm aware of it, like I knew them, is mind-boggling to me. And I'm pretty sure Paul tried to kill me once. There was a point my father would refer to himself as a general contractor. The reality was he was a handyman who had basic plumbing skills and was better than average at putting a roof on a house. And we had been tasked with putting a new roof on the house of his parents' house. My father had set up a number of toe boards across the top of the house so that we could move around relatively freely. But this is 1991, Back Hills, Missouri. We don't have tie-offs, where there's no way we're secured to the roof other than toe boards that we can kind of stand on as we move around the 45 degree or so 2.5-story roof. Well, I think I mentioned that both Paul and Pat were really large, Missouri farm boys. So as I was working on getting some tiles laid down, Paul hangs on to one of the toe boards above me and then proceeds to kind of violently jump down and kick the toe board out from underneath of me, which sent me almost immediately skidding down the side of the Kreutzer family's roof. My dad managed to get to me and catch me just before I was about to either fall to my death or fall to breaking both of my legs for sure. It was a 25-foot drop or so. It was crazy. And it was at that point that my father just kind of immediately got me over to a ladder and got me down to the ground. And then he got down to the ground and he called Paul down from the roof, and they had a little conversation on the ground. They got a little physical for a minute, but pretty sure he tried to kill me that day. So I've met a murderer that probably was trying to murder me, which is even more interesting. But when I think back to the situation with Paul, and having read a whole lot of what they talked about, the defense for not executing this man, which they did, and I'm glad they did, by the way. The defense was that he had spent the majority of his childhood being abused by his adoptive parents in the Kreutzers. No, I can't even wrap my head around how anybody could make that argument. The argument at the time, and you can go look it up, Paul Kreutzer, Kreutzer. The argument at the time was that he was experiencing PTSD from a childhood full of abuse and neglect, and I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I know the Kreutzer family, and I know them well. And they managed to raise Missy, who was an amazing girl, super sweet, super helpful, educated, smart, great kid. And Pat, you know, identical brother, same environment, same circumstances, same nurture, so to speak, who was nothing like his brother. But there was just the incarnation of evil that resided within Pat Kreutzer or Paul Kreutzer. He was terrible. I keep mixing those up, and I'm not going to edit it because I'm lazy. Pat was the sweetest kid you ever want to meet. Paul was terrifying, just terrifying. And it turns out that as a young kid, he had very frequently gotten out of the house late at night and went and done terrible things to farm animals. In one of many examples was him effectively locking a cow's head between the slats of a fence to gain access to the nostrils because the end part of the animal was too big, if you follow my meaning. He was abusing the farm animals. He was attempting to abuse his sister. The kid had major issues, and the end result was, as Dr. Kreutzer said, I don't know what to do. So he took to handcuffing Paul to the bed at night. It's the only way he could think to get him inside, to keep him inside and to keep him from going out and doing these awful things. And I'm only telling you the minor ones. And those aren't even minor. The kid was nuts. At some point the fire department got involved, and, you can't just tie somebody to a bed because, we were doing the counseling, we're doing all of this stuff, and he's sneaking out at night and doing terrible things to the farm animals. I don't know what you want me to do. So the Kreutzer family was doing everything that they could to keep Paul from being able to go out and do horrible things every day. They were taking him to counseling. They were doing all the things that they could possibly think of to keep him out of trouble, and it just was not working. And it ended up culminating in him committing some kind of heinous juvenile crime that there's no record of because I've got to look for it, obviously, because he's a juvenile, that had him sentenced to, the remainder of his childhood years in juvenile detention, which I wish they would have thrown away the fucking key. He was scary. So the defense was made. The ACLU got involved, and they were trying to get a stay of execution for Paul, who absolutely did not care at all. There was no remorse at all. He kind of explained things in very much the way Dahmer did. And frankly, I think he would have had a body count similar to that of Dahmer. Had he had the intellectual capacity to actually plan things out. If you'd coupled Paul up with an IQ that was significant enough to actually plan out any of this stuff, I think it would have been a much, much longer investigative process. And it would not surprise me if there are some other people out there that, that in communities like Pike County, Missouri, it's not uncommon for somebody to not leave their house for years at a time, or not leave their own property for years at a time because they're subsisting off of their own stuff. So it wouldn't surprise me if there were some other crimes that you could probably attribute to Paul that it never really came to light. And given an opportunity to say his last words, he had nothing to say because he didn't care. He never cared, and he wasn't afraid of dying even at the time, from the way that I've heard it. And all of that to say this: there's evil that exists in this world, and I've known, and I've met, and I've interacted with as a sales guy who sees several people a day. Probably a couple 100,000 people in my life. And 2 of them were the manifestation of evil. And maybe there were more somewhere in there, but for the most part, I find that people are generally baseline good. But there are some really scary people that exist in the world. And when I think about Jason, the kid in my first story there, it occurs to me that it would not have been a particularly difficult thing for me to find myself in bad, potentially murderous circumstances with Jason had I said the wrong thing, had I done the wrong thing, had I somehow a rumor had been started about me. I mean, that whole fight that he got in with Ben was about a girl. You know, Jason was scary. And when I think about Paul in particular, Paul almost had a supernatural sense to him. Like there was something attached to that kid that was not good. I mean, this whole situation was when he was 19 years old. The final situation that ended up being responsible for the death of a woman and the destruction of a family, followed by the ending of Paul's life. And I really think it was a mercy on society. It's the kind of person that never should have existed to begin with, and that they're no longer on the planet doesn't bother me at all. And I think that's exactly what we should do when we have somebody who demonstrates a propensity for absolute evil. I think about the Kreutzer family and what all of that did to them. They took their family and the media kind of dragged them through the mud because they were trying everything in their power to help a kid that they adopted out of love and that they raised out of love. One of three that they adopted and raised out of love. Same bloodline. And they ended up with two great ones, and they ended up with one kind of rough one. And the idea that, Paul had ever experienced any PTSD because his dad had, whatever he had to do to keep him from doing terrible things with the farm animals or sneaking out at night and potentially going to a neighbor's house doing something similar to what ended up getting him put in prison and executed. I think about what that did to their family, and it's just, man. Anyway, I just think it's strange that I've known two heinous murderers, and I've known people in my life that have shot people in self-defense or that were gangbangers in one form or another that have definitely taken a life or two. But as far as just a random murderer, I've known two. Somebody that picked somebody up effectively off the street, at random for no particular reason other than, pure enjoyment from all appearances. That I've known two of those is pretty crazy. Anyway, I'm really glad you came and watched my video. And if you've spent any amount of time watching this and you liked it, I'd again appreciate it if you just liked the video. And if you hated the video, like it anyway. It doesn't hurt anything. And if you enjoyed the conversation, please hit the subscribe button. I occasionally talk about things like this, but I also talk about funny things and whatever, and I'm kind of fun. I also have the darkest nipples you've ever seen. Anyway, I've really enjoyed spending time with you today. Thanks for listening to my story about Jason Shipman and Paul Kreutzer. And look them up. You'll be fascinated to read those stories. Thanks for coming.